Hey everybody, welcome to another glorious episode 4 of Jeff Has Cool Friends. I am Jeff and I have a cool friend. I'm very excited to bring this very cool friend back to you. This is my first official return guest from the old show that I'll probably get sued if I say the name of. I don't know. Who knows? Who knows what the rules are over there anymore? But that being said, I'm very excited to have 2 years removed since the last episode, almost officially exactly 2 years. I know it's been that long. The amazing, talented artist, writer, producer, just fantastic all around talent and all around good guy to know, Phil Jimenez. Phil, hi.
Hi, how are you?
How have you been?
I'm good. I'm in a little box. I'm in a soundproof box. I've never done this before. So I'm traveling this weekend. I'm in Cape Cod, and I'm working at this really cool community center where I rent some space, set up my iPad, I do my drawings, and then they have these telephone booth sized closets where you can go and do Zoom recordings just like this one,
Really?
Or podcasts or whatever you're going to do.
It seems like a secret way of saying masturbation chamber.
Well, you know what? Honestly, when I turned the corner, I was like, oh, sorry. It was like as I walked into someone in the bathroom stall.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
It's
because there is some glass. So there's a row of us. And so when you look in, you're like, oh, you feel like you're invaded.
It's like those weird rooms in the library that you never knew people used until you walk by and you're like, what are you doing in there? Like,
and
what?
Technically, it's soundproof. And yet I still feel like I have to whisper.
Don't. You should scream. Okay. Like, who cares? You're not actually at a library. Do whatever you want, man.
I can do whatever I want.
Where
I think I'm going to etch my name on a wall.
You should prison carve it. Yeah, for those, it does look like Phil is in like a gray styrofoam vortex is the best way to describe visually where Phil is right now. So you are on like a sort of pseudo vacation in the Cape.
So my bosses shouldn't hear this, but I've been spending a lot of time in Cape Cod the past year, working my job in Provincetown, which is the very tip of Cape Cod. And I've been very into this place for 20 years or so, but I dig this particular place. It's called the Commons. I'm not hawking it. They're not paying me. But I was here a few years ago, and it was described to me by some people as like an art commune. I'm like, that sounds cool.
Oh, hell yeah.
And it's turned out to be actually a really high-end space. They court artists and like visual artists and actors and directors and all sorts of content creators. And they have multiple levels where there are painting studios. And then I have my own room where I have my drawing set up. So I just hook up my iPad. They have other areas for people who are doing graphic design. So it's kind of amazing, especially in this time, to be among a small number, but still actual human beings, a number of other artists like working in the studio space.
I would say that Provincetown, for being the small town that it is, would actually have a very, very fantastic arts community. I used to summer in Wellfleet. And so I mean at a campground in a camper. So when we say summer, but Provincetown, for those of you that don't know, is historically sort of like the gayest town in America, and proudly and wonderfully and gloriously, unabashedly be yourself in Provincetown. It is such a blast. If you ever get a chance to go, it is so much. I've never been to a place where people were more honest just in existence.
I love that you say that, because my favorite thing about being here, and I know nobody's listening to us to talk about the town, but I've never felt like more myself than I am here, like more relaxed and just more like, okay, I'm going to do whatever, going to be whatever. But what I like about the town, and then I can stop, shilling for it.
No, this is literally just us talking.
Okay.
People know what they're paying for.
I appreciate that. But what I do like about the town is it does have this very interesting and long artistic tradition. So like artists and writers used to come up from New York to Massachusetts in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they kind of established this art colony in what was otherwise a Portuguese fishing village. And now there's this just really interesting and crazy tradition. It's super gay, but it's also, it's really artist friendly more than anything. And yet it's also a working town. So if you come here, you can spend the entire weekend like partying in bars, or I think there's something like 90 plus galleries. So you can spend the whole time gallery hopping. Or when I've been coming up here, I've been working in this art community center and just speaking again to other graphic designers and artists, and it's actually been really amazing. So it's a good time.
I would say that going to Provincetown in my early 20s, because I was probably like 21, 22 when I used to go.
Last year?
Oh, go on with that.
Right?
Literally almost half my life ago. It's funny because I recognize and understand that who I was when I was 21 is not who I am now. I was relatively progressive, or at least I thought I was, but I still was uneasy around a lot of things. And I still, like, I could have easily gone in a direction of libertarianism. Like I could see myself being twisted to go in the wrong direction. And I think the times I spent sort of familiarizing myself with a community that I was not regularly in contact with, I think really helped me sort of push myself towards the general understanding and empathy of, just because you don't understand something doesn't mean that it's either right or wrong. It's just, you don't get it. Right. And that was a great example of seeing, 6 foot tall, beautiful drag queens on roller skates going around. It's like, well, I've never seen that before. And while my immediate reaction is like, what the f-? Like your first immediate reaction, you're like, oh, this is just people having a good time. And like, nobody's getting hurt. And right. That I think a lot of people really miss out on is the immersion of other communities. And, it's like when you try to have your grandma try Indian food for the first time or something like that. And what did you have a situation like that?
I did. So yeah, I want you to finish the thought because it's a hugely important thought that you're having.
I would say that it is one of those things though that like immersion, because remember I grew up in a small farm town in Massachusetts, right. 96 point something % white. We had 5 churches in this population 10,000 town. And that town became very insulated. And a lot of the people that I know that never really left it did not allow themselves to grow as people. They might have grown their bank accounts or their intellect of study, but they certainly did not sort of immerse themselves in the ocean of humanity. And so therefore...
That's a beautiful phrase.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I just came up with it on my own. It
was good. It's good. I like it.
That's why I make the medium bucks. But that idea of like never getting wet in that world and surrounding yourself with people that view things differently, that believe things differently, that grew up differently, that grew up with different levels of wealth or understanding, that listen to different music, to not have that insulates you in a way that I think can harm you and the people around you in the future. And I do feel that sort of spending my time in Provincetown definitely helped open me up to the more allowing myself to accept everybody for who they are. Whereas my teen self would have been a lot more reactive of like, ooh, that's weird.
So would my teen self have been reactive, right? Like I grew up, as you know, in Los Angeles, but went to high school in Orange County, which at the time was super, it's still conservative, but like that was not a place where my memory is that was not a place where difference was encouraged, much difference of any kind. That said, I want to spin back to this because one of the things that stuns me about you in like the very best way is it just stuns me to hear that you think of yourself like that you could have gone in this other direction, because you've told me that before. But as long as I've known you, you were one of the most thoughtful, and I would argue empathetic, probably to a fault, people in my circle, right? Like you are kind and considerate and really thoughtful, I think, of the world in a way a lot of people are not. And a lot of people that, similar to those that you just described, would not be. And so I'm curious, where does that come from? I know you were a teacher once.
So
but go ahead.
There's a couple of answers to that. Now that you're interviewing me on my interview show, this is perfect. Oh, yeah. This is everything I signed up for. I would say and this ties back to our two immediate connections. Number one, I think education helped. Sure, like getting a higher education. But again, I went to college in Maine. So like, was my education particularly very diverse? Not really. Our first contact was actually when I was in independent study in college for art.
Right.
And I emailed you tracing sort of like what we consider fine art influences through comics artists. And you were one of the people that responded and gave me a very thoughtful thing and helped me get an A in this class. Appreciate you. I was also 21 at the time. I was in one of those situations where anytime I was in trouble, I recognized that it was my fault. I was a boxer at the time. I had been training.
Right. Yep.
I had been training police how to fight at some point in time. And so I definitely recognized the like, oh, they're nice to me kind of thing. And I was like, oh, well, every time I get in trouble, it's because I did something wrong. So like, why do you have to worry about the police, for example, if you're not doing anything wrong, which is a very, very myopic viewpoint of that. We first officially met, as in having a conversation, in 2013. Now, from in between those areas, I had a job teaching in my hometown, the same insulated hometown that I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
I had been married, gone through a divorce, turned 30, retired from teaching, moved across the country to a much more diverse city. I worked in entertainment. My friends became a much more diverse group. And that's nothing to say against my friends back home, because all of my friends back home, for the lack of diversity that I have in my friendships, which is not of no fault, I can't blame my town for the fact I'm like, why didn't I have black friends growing up? It's like, well, there weren't any black kids. Sorry. I don't know what to tell you. That while, the majority of my friend base when I grew up is white, they are all wonderful people and all relatively progressive and cool and chill and fun. Out here, I got the same quality of people, but with that level of diversity, and that granted me understanding. I still am of two minds about a lot of things, that I still have instincts that immediately I curtail with my thoughts. So like sometimes I'll see something and react in one way and be like, no, that's not. Think about it. It's just, I still think I'm not the most progressive person. I try to work with empathy. I try to live my life in a way that I'm causing no harm. I would say the pandemic, that backfired on me because my empathy turned to anger for people without empathy.
Yes.
And I became like kind of an asshole, mm-hmm. and the people around me suffered for that. And so that actually ended up sort of being this very sort of judo version of empathy where my empathy became a fault. It became a problem because I was becoming angry at inconsiderate people. And then I had to realize, and I was internalizing that and poisoning the people around me with that anger for having no vent, having my life crash from that, and then being like, well, now I have to rebuild a new thing. And so trying to like build from that. So as much as I appreciate all of those compliments, there's certainly a boomerang aspect to that. But as a reminder, you are one of those people that you just projected onto me of being very kind and empathetic.
I do appreciate that. I've gone through the same thing the past 4 years where that empathy has turned to anger, which has turned to sort of toxicity where I can sense when I'm just unpleasant in a room, and I absolutely hate it, but I don't know how to stop it. Right. Like, because
it's so awkward to try to stop it when you know it's happened. There have been times where I've said out loud at like an event, I'm like, I think I'm being an asshole and I don't want to be. I'm actually going to remove myself from the situation. Yep. And you say that because you're like, like in a moment of clarity. But then in the same time, even that kind of makes you seem like an asshole.
But I would say the past 4 years, and anyone that follows me on social media knows this, particularly because my Twitter feed just got heavy and dark and unpleasant and reactive, and sharp and not good ways. I think because it was my only, as social media for so many, it was an only method of venting, right? Or expressing anger or distress or dissatisfaction. And I became way more judgmental than I felt comfortable with or intended. But what you said so specifically was, part of it is just a sense, and again, I don't mean to sound self-aggrandizing, but I don't even know if it's empathy, but it's awareness, right? When you're suddenly aware of so much, the ability to turn that down, I think is very, I don't have it. So I'm constantly aware, even in the back of my head. So I always say I'm never 100% present in any situation I'm in, because I just feel like I'm aware of other stuff. And it's a very strange sensation.
I think the last year should be like a mulligan, where we should all, I mean, we all have to learn from this, but like I'm finding that I am sort of learning to forgive the negative behaviors of the past year, because we were all shouting in the dark.
Right.
Like we were all living in this putrid poison for a year. And the people that weren't were the people that don't care about other people. Like you have to be a damn sociopath to have not felt the hit of last year. And you know, I saw it a lot. Like I am an extrovert naturally. I am a person who gets their energy from other people, and that was removed from me. And so I saw, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, the first couple of months, people that were thriving because they were like just recharging constantly, because they're like, that's what I like. I'm a writer, or I'm an artist, and I've been doing this for so long. You know, so many of my very good friends are comics writers and artists that have been like, oh, this is what I've been doing for the past 25 years. I can't do that. You know, I haven't performed stand-up live in over a year. I've forgotten that I love it. It's almost like, to me, it's almost like a breakup that I forgot about, where I like want to get back on, but I also don't want to inspire anybody to get sick. So I'm trying to find like, when am I going to be comfortable getting back onto that stage? And like, will I even remember my material? That's
you'll forgive the pause, because that's so I was having this conversation with friends this morning, a friend who's a social worker who's here with me now. We were just talking about, it's so fascinating because it was about social responsibility and kind of the myth of individual freedom, or maybe not a myth, but the conflict inherent in that, right? When you don't have a sense that you are responsible for anyone else, and you almost pride yourself on that sensibility, that way of thinking, like, you take care of you, I'll take care of me, and that's how it's going to go. And it's an alien way of thinking to me. It's also a very frustrating way.
It's inhuman.
Anger, yes. But one of the things that's been very interesting to me, and I think about this when it comes to the business that we're in, right, sort of entertainment, but also like the stories we're telling, the characters we're using, the messaging, and et cetera, et cetera. One of the things the past 4 years particularly, and then certainly the last year, really made me think about was sociopathology generally, or lack of empathy, and how we learn empathy. And what it felt like was, as we know, like a third of the country, maybe even more, just doesn't have it, right? Like they don't have it, and might not even be interested in it. That's the infuriating part right there. Yeah. And I was waiting for you to drop that one, is that they're not interested in developing a conscience. These are the people that are like, I support my family, I'm a good person. And it's like, no, that's just part of life. That's just part of what you have to do to be a minimum. Yeah. Right? Like that's, you're doing what you're supposed to. And so for me, being a creative fiction, we've talked about this before, but also like a creator who works when heroic ideals, grappling with our responsibility to each other, but also dealing with the fact that it's not rare. There are a lot of people who don't care about other people. I would add that many of them are nerds in the comic book sector that have never learned a lesson from anything they've ever read, apparently. There is absolutely that. I remember that there were times where I was told, in no uncertain terms, you can't speak about politics because essentially, like, racists are going to spend money on these superhero characters. Oh, yeah. And it's like, oh, but I don't think they understand. Like, why would they get a Captain America thing? Like, why would anybody who is
an anti-masker or an anti like or pro-Trump, why would they pay money for a Captain America toy? Because that defeats the entire point. That means you've never learned anything about this character that you say you love, and that blows my mind.
I mean, this, as you know, constant conversation among peers and on Twitter, but about what readers learn from these characters, particularly the sort of mainstream, and I say mainstream, like the corporate superheroes who represent, I mean, who baked into their
Caps,
DNA,
your Caps, your Iron Mans, your Supermans, your Batmans, your Wonder Womans.
Like, that's part of who they are. Like, just on paper, if you were to write, you know, check boxes, that's who they are. And so the resistance to that and is boggling. It really makes, I feel like it was Mark Waid who said he was really struggling, I think it was him, with how long he'd been in the business and coming to realize how half his audience was not getting what he was writing.
Yeah, there's a good example of that. I think a good example, and only because I had to spend about 16 hours total watching this film, was the Snyder cut of Justice League, when Wonder Woman straight up murders the dude that she prevents from killing from setting off the bomb, and then she explodes this dude, destroying the building in the process. And I'm like, oh, see, that's not what Wonder Woman would do. Like, there's a zero, like, how do you, and they're like, that was awesome. And it's like, that's not the character. Like you can't say that this is the definitive version of the character if the character is just murdering dudes that she doesn't have to murder.
Right.
It's just weird to me that there are people that just explicitly revel in the fact that they don't get it. Like, they don't want to interpret. It's so surface for them.
It's very surface, but I've come to realize, and this goes to our larger conversation about empathy, perhaps education, but I think there are a lot of educated people who are sociopaths, about, oh shoot, I just lost my train of thought, but how surface so much entertainment is to people. And that's something that's, I think, because when I was a kid, I was by myself so much, I looked to that stuff and I took everything I could. That's all I thought about were the cartoons and comics and TV and toy, like all that pop culture stuff. I mean, I just devoured it. Partly, it was escape. It was a place for my brain to go. But even at young ages, I was contemplating what it meant, like what the words meant.
Right? Like, why would they make those choices?
Yes, I've told the story so many times. But when I first met Walter Simonson, I was telling him about a Star Wars story that meant so much to me, and I believe it was issue 53 of the original Marvel Comics run, and it was the second part of To Take the Tarkin, and the rebellion blew up an Empire base. In the very end, C-3PO is like, Princess Leia, why aren't you happy? Like, we just defeated the bad guys. And she goes on to talk about how, well, we just blew up a lot of people and they're all dead and they probably had families and some of them might have just been doing their jobs, etc. And something in the language of that, and I was 10, 11 when I read that, like, affected my worldview to this day, right? Like, it had such impact on me because it was a perspective I'd never even thought about, because we would see these huge explosions in these movies, but not really think about what they meant.
Yeah,
right?
It became, I think Clerks really sort of brought that to the mainstream of the understanding with the Star Wars. I mean, obviously the comic was the comic, but, a few years later when Kevin Smith sort of dissects that whole concept of the, are there innocent people on the Death Star? Are there contractors?
Are there contractors, right? Like, and in that environment where they just trying to pay, like, get the job done to pay their family, right? Which I think what's really interesting to me about that is I was 10 and that helped shape my worldview. I think other people don't even remember the scene. Like it wouldn't even occur to them. And so it just really makes me interested in how people use what they take from information, from entertainment generally, how they process that information. And when it comes to things like these characters, we talk about this, you and I have talked about this so many times. Superheroes particularly have kind of a moral and ethical code. And I do wonder, like, how often people dissect their own.
I mean, I have to sort of like, there are things that I understand that like I have to exist within an ethical thing, and then some things that I choose to sort of ignore. There, like for example, like I bought a small amount of cryptocurrency just because I was like, it would be nice to make a little bit of money.
Right.
And I've made a lot, not a lot, but I've made money. I've like doubled my money.
Sure.
Fine. Okay. I recognize and understand that cryptocurrency has a economic or an ecological footprint that is not good. And in the meantime, I refuse to use Amazon. I will not do it. I steal a Prime account so I can watch things. Sorry, but I will not give them money. I will not pay them to destroy the world. It's just, right. They're not, and to torture their workers. I won't do it. I won't eat at Chick-fil-A, which is like, sorry, but I can eat a sandwich at Popeyes and it's the same thing. Sure, or something like that. But I do sort of like have to understand that there are levels of hypocrisy, because there's no such thing as like a clean, our hands are never fully clean. We live in America. Like,
here's the thing. I wouldn't even claim that they were. I wouldn't even.
Yeah.
I'm so far from like being ethically clean. What I think is really interesting though more is the concept of just making the world a better place, right? Not making it perfect, but making it a little bit better. And if there's anything I've taken from working with these characters for so long, is that's what they're attempting. The characters I like, that's what they're attempting to do. That's what Spider-Man's attempting to do, is make the world a little bit better.
Just
right?
a little bit.
Just a little bit.
I think that's good. And I think I'm going to hit on that in a second. What I do want to do right now is take a half a second to give a shout out to all of the producers at the $10 level of my Patreon. And if you are listening on Patreon, thank you very much. I have a few names, Phil, that I'm going to read off to you. These are the people that were so kind. They were kind enough to pay extra just to have me say their name on here.
Oh,
and then they send me silly names. Again, these are the names that I have been given. If you did not give me a name this week, make sure you get those to me so I can make sure to give you that credit. I want you to feel like you have earned every damn dime that you have given me. First and foremost, and Phil, you can react to it however you want. We have Kool-Aid Molotov. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Lemming Malloy. These 7 Bs. Miguel Acuna. Nolan Matten. Cronenberger, Grumblebee, Mike Gotts, Instagrams at Bob_of_skull. That's a good way to do it, I think. Just plug your Instagram. He's an art collector. I'm sure he's probably contacted you in the past. Saint Gut Free, Funky J, David Knifeboot Hinson, Fushizless Jones, JK, Jeff May's biggest fan. Dill Havarti, that's my favorite cheese, by the way. In case you were wondering, if you're thinking about Christmas gifts for me, it's Dill Havarti. Jolly Buckaroo, Normal Man, Andrew McGuire, Vortispin, Norm from Cheers, Shebrew Sleeps, the ghost of Dave Thomas. Ooh, an adopted ghost. Sophia Hapgood, Russell Richardson's Twitter at Hello TARDIS. Show me in the rules where it says a dog can't play basketball. They're probably in the rules, if I can be honest. I would assume that there is a rule for that. Murph the Murph, Dan Hackroyd, Boner Bonanza, Mackenzie Willem Dafoe's baffling big boner bonanza chill, at Nerd Numbers, Ricky Cilantro, Gray Man of the Fireside, Andrew doesn't even like sports, Lef, the AV Foundry, Gregorio, Captain Fatstrong, Jessica Robertson, at Gavin_not, that's with 2 T's, Cody Beck, Billy, quote, I stole Cody's last name and there's nothing she can do about it, Beck. Mind Freak 555, Taurus Bulba, Huey, Lisa Harden, Rudy Rueda, Burrito Mouth, Dr. DNA, Silius Ruby, Kelly Stanaway, Adrienne, I didn't kill my wife. DavyFrancis.com, the most well-prepared dead guy, Jennifer Fendelander, Bart Fardigan, I'm the law, martial law, and I hate superheroes. It's going to be a rough one for you. Lemming Malloy, did I say him? How about this? Yeah. This is a good, I love this one. The 1993 Marvel masterpiece of Spider-Woman.
Oh.
Do you remember that? Do you remember that card?
I don't.
It was by, I believe it was by Tristan Shane, I want to say was the artist.
I love to remember this.
It is a beautiful piece, and you should definitely check it out. I do love that piece, so excellent choice.
Okay.
I'm more tired than a big bat. Scoundrel, Kimball, the fully sanctioned buffoon. I have a couple that I may be a repeat. Proto Clown, capable of withstanding both shoes. Russell from Jersey, Pizza Bagels, Taylor Ham, Bold and Brash, more like belongs in the trash. Logan Rarasich, hi, I'm Super Fudge, and welcome to Fudgemania. Craft beers make my alcoholism look like a neat hobby. Willie Dustis, Jez Butt, Grayman of the Fireside, the Ian McLendon, El Celdo, and Exploding Runes. And I recognize and understand that I may have repeated a couple of them, but I don't want to this up. I had a couple people bail on their patrons because they were like, they didn't give me what I asked for, and I was like, did you send me a name? So I just want to make sure I get all of them covered, because I can't afford to lose any patrons.
That's pretty hardcore.
I mean, they're paying the extra money for me to say their name, and if I don't do it, and it's a bi-weekly show for now, I get it.
I mean, I guess, but like, you know. I
sent one of the guys a message, be like, hey man, I'm so sorry. I might have missed it. And if there's anything I can do, you know, obviously don't feel like you have to come back, but just, you know, I appreciate you giving me and just never replied.
Wow.
It's fine. It's fine. I appreciate anybody even clicking on it to say, hey, for a second, like
for sure.
Patreon literally saved me. Like, and the people on here, so like I with them pretty hard, and I'm going to do everything I can to make through.
I actually think it's awesome, but that's very you, by the way. It's very you to do that.
To make money off of people donating to me?
I would say to honor your obligations. It's very you.
I mean, I'd say that's just good business. Like, I understand the obligations aspect of it, but there is the good business aspect of like, if they remove themselves from it, like, you know, Patreon. Sure. I'm still figuring this out. It's hard. Like, I see some of the other, like, you know, when I think of like, you know, the unpopular opinion Patreon that I've been a part of and Gamefully Unemployed and stuff. And mostly I've been doing just, you know, the recording and stuff like that. But doing one on your own is not easy. So shout out to everybody that runs one successfully, because this is really hard.
I've been amazed at the number of my former students. I remember first learning a Patreon, I was actually embarrassed. I was in a classroom, I was teaching. And so all my students, what I'd like to get them to do is verbalize their post-college dreams. So I tell them I had the good fortune of I started working in comics this summer after my sophomore year of college. Oof. But I also knew exactly what I wanted to do. I was so driven and so specific. So I was able to articulate my dreams and kind of go for them. Other people, it's a little more nebulous. And what I like them to do is articulate them, verbalize them in a way of sort of kind of a new agey way of making them work a little bit closer to reality, right? Like by having to say it out loud, it's a step.
It's the secret.
Okay.
It's the secret.
It's a secret. Right, yeah. Right. And then, but it's also something you can pin on the wall and be like, that's what you're aiming for, right? So always remember that's what you're aiming for. And I do like to keep it short term because life changes dramatically. But like, what's your ideal job after college? Like, how do you want to see your work displayed? Blah, 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 blah. And so many of my students have very specific ideas. Some are just like, I just want to make art. One was just like, I'm just going to make art. I'm going to put it out on Patreon. And I'm going to sell it. And I didn't know what that was. This was like 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And it's like, oh, and I never had someone tell me this before. Most of the students had a publisher in mind, or a movie studio, or a game studio. They had something. Mm-hmm. And this guy, his whole goal was he just wanted to put art on Patreon and have people pay for it. And I was like, okay, well, good luck with that. I mean, I did not dismiss it, because you just never know in this world. But in my head, I think that's what I was thinking. If only I knew.
Here's what I'll tell you about Patreon and the shift of that is that I am now officially my own boss on this specific show. Right. I am not beholden to the corporate trappings that I was previously, which I want to say I loved the job that I had previously.
Yeah.
I really did. There was a certain prestige that I got from there. A lot of people wanted to do the show just because they liked the company that I worked for, but I wasn't allowed to be my full self. Mm-hmm. I was given a lot of leeway, probably more leeway than I should have had. But there were certain rules that I was never allowed to violate. And in turn, my private life and social media ended up sort of proving that, which is it is what it is. The fact that I get to be my own boss is awesome. The work that I have now, you know, like when I think about, like, because it used to be like I record the show, I would send it off to super producer Sam, and he would make this beautiful, this amazing, you know, project that he would throw together. And I tried piecing all that together, and I'm like, man, this is a fucking nightmare. Like, there are so many better, more talented people that made me look good. Whereas I'm like, well, I just talk. And that there's something to be said about, like, owning your own shit. I get to be myself. And if somebody's like, I don't like that you said something about Trump, I'll be like, great, off forever. Right. I don't want your fandom. Eat my entire and I can say that, which I couldn't say before. And I think a lot of people miss the point of that, where in fandom that they think that they have this customer's always right sort of vibe in fandom. And I think my fans are not like that. I think my fans are super, super supportive and understanding. But I think fans of, like, comics in general, they'll be like, oh, good luck. And it's just like, off. Yeah. You know, you don't get to decide how fiction travels.
Sure. I have a question about this, and I think we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
This talk that we all have about fandom, right? And toxic fandom.
Mm-hmm.
Did that always exist and I was just oblivious to it before Twitter?
I think we get to see it more. Yeah, it's always pretty much existed. I think a good example might be sort of the Michael Keaton Batman casting and the people that were all angry about that. You could see it in letters columns sometimes. I mean, remember Stan Lee did that Stan soapbox about when people were sending him letters complaining about their progressive policies. And he was just like, yeah, you're going to get those.
Right.
Sorry, we believe in actual justice, which for all of Stan Lee's failings, that was a huge thing to do, because I believe that was in, like, the late 60s.
Oh, yes.
And so good for him for sort of fighting back against sort of regressive ideas. Toxic fandom has always existed. It has become more prevalent, and they have found their tribe. It used to be you would find your toxic fans being toxic in the comic shop, and it was a relatively insulated place, but it also created it to be a not so safe space. Remember, comic shops weren't always considered warm and welcoming the way they are now.
Which is strange, because I worked at a comic store when I was from 15 to 20 in Huntington Beach, Comics Unlimited. And what's so weird in hindsight, I would love to interview the people that I worked with looking back on it, because the staff was almost entirely women. And I would be very, very curious. There were a group of guys. As a matter of fact, as a bizarre side segue, the cast of Otherworld, my creator-owned book, those characters were all based on people that I worked with. I mean, there were extrapolations. I mean, they're nothing like them, but they all started. The root of each of those characters started with someone I worked with at the comic shop in those 5 years. But the reason I bring it up is, of course, I was, you know, a young teenage boy, so I don't remember it any particular way. Other that's where I met Adam Hughes and Jim Lee for the first time. But there were so many women working there, and I had a woman manager, Nancy. I would love to get their take on toxic. I'm assuming a lot of it's male fandom, and if it existed there in the same way it did other comic shops, because I think they created a very safe space for consumers. Nancy was, like, dedicated to it. At the front of the store was all, like, product that was pop culture product, but not, you know, it was posters and t-shirts and keychains and all sorts of things just to get people in, because she wanted people to come in from the street. She didn't want just comic book nerds to come in from the street.
So my comic shop was the one that I worked at was very successful for a very similar reason, is that the majority of their money came in through secondary sort of byproducts of comics, as well as used DVDs and video games. That was like the big thing, like DVDs and video games, especially vintage video games. like we would get Nintendos and just like they would just roll out classic Super Nintendos, and like people would just yard sale their shit to us, and then we would sell it back. And that got a lot of people in. I would say my experience as a man nearing his 30s when I had that job was that the women were oftentimes in and granted, we were in the city of Worcester, which, you know, is not, I would say not the most progressive of the, Massachusetts is a ridiculously progressive state, but not on an individual basis.
Right, right.
And that we would get a lot of like, our female employees would get sort of like asked out all the time. They would get sort of, what do you know vibe about comics, which also I had to deal with a lot of the, oh, what do you know about Batman? It'd be like, so much more than you. I don't know why you're treating me like an just because I'm here. I used to get just, like, cause I didn't look like the stereotype. And so I would oftentimes get sort of like reverse bullied a little bit. And I was like, I don't know what you want from me, man. I'm holding a stack of West Coast Avengers in my hand. I feel like I know what I'm doing.
It's funny to say that really quick. So West Coast Avengers, when it became Avengers West Coast, was because the owner of my comic store called up Marvel because he wanted to rack the Avengers books together. It was like, you need to rename this. And so Avengers West Coast Avengers became Avengers West Coast for racking purposes, thanks to the guy that owned my comic book store. That's
bananas, because if I was Marvel, I would have said, just everyone will get it. Just put it next to Avengers.
Well, it's funny because his store, I think at the time, because there were like 3 or 4 of them, they were big money makers at the time for the comic companies, and we racked everything alphabetically. And I remember, God, there used to be like discussions about like having Action Comics not next to Superman, right? Like, why didn't you clump like comics together? I think the argument was because you might stumble onto something like, here's Action, but you might stumble onto Adventure, but right, Deadpool on your way over to Superman and like not know any better, right? So I think it was a way of thinking about how people consume, and sort of kind of like, how record shops, I remember hearing this like in Tower Records, like the idea was you just wanted to look through stuff, like go through the racks of DVDs and things like that, or albums, whatever you're looking through, because you might stumble onto something. And one of the interesting things about curated sort of digital zones, particularly when it comes to things like iTunes, is that you don't stumble onto things so easily, because they're making assumptions about what you like based on previous purchases. That's
fair. Although I would say that, I don't know, I'm sure it had its way of working, racking the comics like that.
I mean, this is 1985, mind you.
Yeah, I would say, like, from a realistic perspective, anybody who's going at the comics racks are probably going to be perusing. I've never seen somebody go to a shop, go just to like, oh, got my Detective Comics, I'm going to leave. I don't think I've ever seen that. I think every person at a comic shop, it browses all the racks. Right. And then I would say that it does the opposite of like, if you want all your Spider-Man, if you want your Spider-Man fans to see that you can get Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, and just Spider-Man when they're all next to each other and in that sort of like secondary alphabetical order, usually with like a sign. I think we always would have signs like, here's the Superman stuff, here's the Batman stuff.
My memory is that we did that too, that there were in other racks, they were like the big, so if it was Detective Comics or if it was the Superman line or whatever, the Spider-Man line, I think we also clumped them together so you could just come and get all that once. But this is neither here nor there. It's not particularly interesting.
It is interesting. We could all talk about the minutia of the organization of retail comic shops and their racking all they want, except I do have a couple of projects that I need to talk to you about.
Except I need to interrupt you very quickly and apologize to your readers. So one thing that's happened in the past year, because I've gotten very bad at these things. Like actually the past couple of years, I end up finding that the stuff that nobody cares about is the stuff that I wanted to. I'm one of those creators now that just wants to talk about the stuff nobody cares about.
Like Legion of Superheroes?
Oh, that was
Can I tell you something? I was, because
wow.
on Tom and Jeff Watch Batman, I tried to explain to my co-host Tom, like, sort of like what Legion of Superheroes is, and I was like, okay, it's the thing that all comics creators love and like 9 fans love, which is like
That's not true. There was a period of time in the 80s that was the second biggest book.
Sure.
I'm just saying.
And then every reboot since has bailed with some of the greatest writing teams and creative teams out there. When you look at, I believe the most recent one was with Bendis and Ryan Sook, and people were just like, like they just didn't care.
Because 6 reboots later, why do you care? I mean, part of that I think is, I'm sorry, I'm a big Legion fan.
Go for it. I know you are, which is why I brought it up.
Right. But this is, I think, a larger problem with comics generally, like mainstream, I'm talking mainstream corporate superhero comics. When you're on your 6th reboot in, 15 years, who gives a shit, right?
Lots of people, because when it's like Batman or Superman,
Batman has never been rebooted. Batman hasn't been rebooted really since 1986.
New 52.
There was most of Batman's history remained
the general consensus of the idea, because you can't erase Thomas and Martha Wayne getting killed in the alley, blah, blah, blah. But I would say that Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's New 52 version of Batman was an amazing way of telling it that sort of didn't necessarily lean too heavily on what came before it, but built a new version of it.
I still would argue that's not like, it doesn't, anytime those guys wanted to, they could have gone back to stuff and pulled it out. It would have been in canon, for example.
Sure, but that's like what Jeff Johns did with Green Lantern when New 52 started, and he's like, well, I'm just going to keep doing the thing I wanted.
Right, and this is a whole interesting conversation about reboots generally, because things like Green Lantern and Batman, if the popular books don't reboot, so the rest of the reboot doesn't matter. Regardless, even if you only have, say, most things over a long period of time, you get a cleanup. Like I always say, the Batman and Green Lantern stuff, they were dusted off. They were not rebuilt from the ground up, like conceptually.
Well, they didn't rebuild the engine, but they did the body over.
Okay, I think we disagree on what. No, I'm just saying. I think maybe we disagree on what a reboot is.
Okay,
but the thing with Legion is that each of those, the Legion that was most successful, I argue it was successful because it had a point of view about the future, about teenagers, about heroism, etc., that resonated at the time. I actually argue that the biggest problem with the reboots is its point of view that is not, aside from the fact that once you're in the 6th or 7th reboot, I think there's no sense that it's going to matter anyway, because it's going to be rebooted in a couple of years, so who cares? But if it does, the point of view, I think, really matters, and no matter the creative team.
I would say that a lot of it does rely on having to make people care about the characters and want to continue reading about them. And there's something about the Legion that just doesn't appeal to modern fans the way it did to fans in the 80s, for example. It was the Paul Levitz run, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which was an extension of a I mean, that was ultimately a 30-year run that he just had a really good time on.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about that book. And the reason I brought it up is because it is this creator favorite book. It's this book that so many creators love. But if you were to ask fans, it's just this kind of thing that people are like, meh. Like, they're like, I'll give it a try. Like I bought the Legion reboots. Like I bought the books and started reading them. And I think the reason that you have to sort of do like more of a harder reboot is because you need to familiarize people with this cast of characters that were previously doing well on a 30-year run. And then it became a relic. The Legion of Superheroes became this lost relic of existence, where people are like, oh, I think I remember what it wasn't there like a bouncing guy or like it was almost this like very weird Silver Age snapshot that it's like a fever dream that you have to reintroduce people to. And I just don't think the modern audiences are that interested in learning about them, which I'm not saying is good or bad. I'm just saying it's a fascinating.
So why they're not interested.
That's fair. But you're also a huge fan.
Yes. But I think I'm a fan who's worked in the industry and who's seen that. I just don't think multiple reboots you're going to get anyone to care. Like in my perfect Legion world, you would let that property rest for 10 years. You would not, because I just think that because every time you try and fail, it makes it look more like a failure, and people become even less interested in it.
Yeah, I wonder if the futuristic part of it is just like, I wonder if people view it as like camp at this point in time, but not worth the cover price of a comic these days for that camp.
Well, the other thing I think is, and so I admittedly am not a fan of most reboots because I don't like its perspective on the future, because the future seems so now. And the thing that I used to love about the Legion was that it felt like the future. And so and a lot of it had to do with it. It's a science fiction book.
It's also, the idea of a utopian future is almost laughable in 2021. Like, where we think about like the way we've like back in the day when like boomers were in charge, they had the idea of a utopian future because they didn't really consider what they were doing to the planet. Where nowadays, if any book is covering the future, good luck making it utopian and having anybody believe it.
Well, the second part is the interesting thing, because I've had long conversations with Levitz about his views of the future, which were rooted in a very specific ideology, which is kind of fascinating. And it makes me wonder about the creators of the past three reboots, what their ideology about the future was.
The Levitz Legion run has this sort of like World's Fair optimism. It's like Epcot optimism, where you'd see like that the future has this very sort of like Jetsons-y utopian quality, while they are sort of, and like a lot of times with the Legion, they were dealing with problems in the past from the future. I saw that a lot.
I think, yeah, well, again, as you pointed out, I'm a fan. I actually think I disagree with that. Like, of those 8 years, I actually think most of it took place in the future, but I also think it had a lot to do with Paul's take on like what villainy was, his take on how we're going to get to the 30th century, right? So like, and I think there are interesting things about a modern audience. Like believing that we will ever get to a 30th century, which I don't think they actually probably do. I think we'll probably be dead as a species in the next 100 years.
If Legion of Superheroes was done now, they'd be like, it's 2035. And that's as far as we're going to look forward to.
But Paul had a very interesting take on how what he believed we would need as a species to get to a 30th century utopia. And he also chose actively to make his villains characters who embodied certain science fiction concepts. And again, like, for better or worse, I think it resonates with fans like my age because it was such a specific vision. And the thing about Legion that has always struck me as a fan of that material is I always feel like I'm reading about a super team that doesn't need to be in the future.
Fair.
Like, there's no reason those characters, if the future, this is one of those few times where I'd say the world building matters. Like, normally I think when you're talking about creativity, the characters and the emotions those characters give are the most important thing. And Legion is one of those few places where I think the world itself informs the characters.
I like that. That's a fresh take, and I like it. Good.
All done.
It's good. I have two projects that I want to talk to you about, and then I want to sort of discuss a question from the two projects, because the first thing that I want to say, June, I believe, is Pride Month, correct?
Yes.
All right. Good job. I'm an ally. June is Pride Month, and you have been posting these amazing Pride variants that you've been drawing for Marvel, featuring many of the LGBTQ plus characters of the Marvel universe. You've been sharing them. I believe we've seen Wiccan and Hulkling. We've seen, I think, most recently you shared Mystique. You did a North Star at one point in time, Valkyrie, right?
Yes.
These are fantastic, by the way. Do you obviously signed up for this project, so you are very much behind Marvel doing these, or was it just a really good paycheck? But it was sort of my I wanted to talk to you about sort of like corporate versions of Pride.
Sure.
And if you feel that, and I don't know if we've actually officially discussed this, but you are, I think, famously known, like sort of one of the first openly out comics creators in the industry. I don't think it was ever really hidden, which is fantastic and wonderful and so brave. And I do mean that. That wasn't meant to sound condescending the way I feel like it might have.
That was great.
But like, so like, obviously you're participating in this, so you are supporting the project. Do you feel that Pride has been sort of corrupted in with corporate versions, or do you feel that it has sort of allowed sort of the mainstreaming of acceptance to come through? Or is it a little like, because I feel like sometimes it comes off pandering, and then sometimes it comes off like, yeah, but it's also giving, you know, Target doing this makes a lot of people that would shop at Target have to consider the reality of different people. How do you sort of view that level of involvement with Pride and corporations?
God, that's a multi-layered question.
Is that too much? Is that too much for like a podcast where we have maybe 15 minutes left?
Are you kidding? I mean, we just talked for 15 minutes about the Legion and you know how to rack.
I spent too much on Matter Eater, lad. Yeah, I don't have enough.
Yeah. No, that was actually great. I'm just trying to think. So one of the things I think is really interesting about Marvel is, you know, back when I was racking West Coast Avengers as Avengers West Coast, you couldn't even use the word gay in those comics, right? Like when I worked at that comic store and Alpha Flight was out, and North Star was in that book, like he was a closet. I mean, he wasn't closeted. The character was closeted. By Marvel itself. Like in those comics, what I still think is amazing that John Byrne got away with is he totally is gay if you know the subtext, right? But like sure. John Byrne had to get around Jim Shooter's no gay rule. Now, suddenly 30 years later, you know, it's like pink covers with gay couples on them, you know, celebrating, you know, as part of a larger sort of corporate celebration of an event meant to, you know, that started, you know, with the Stonewall riots and now has ended in this giant parade. So I myself am just kind of like, wow, that's some history, right? Took some time, but that's pretty great. And our biggest argument on this covers, which is hilarious, was how pink they should be. Because I really wanted them for a variety of reasons. Like I wanted the covers I've been sharing had the original pink design because I wanted for racking purposes, because I still think like I work in a comic store, but also thematic ones. I wanted their backgrounds to be pink, right? Because I liked the idea, quite frankly, because pink is a loaded color, especially hot sort of, as my friends call it, RuPaul pink. And I liked the idea of the average comic consumer, in my head mostly male, buying comics with like hot pink covers. Like I thought that was just kind of great. And that was a back and forth for the longest because they wanted to do a rainbow cover. And I was just like, I just didn't want that because it
kind of seems like you might need to be like, all right, calm down. They're going to get it.
They're going to get it. Well, what I found out, interestingly enough, through another conversation was that some gay folks at Marvel didn't like the color pink, right? Like I don't know if it was aesthetically, professionally, politically, or from a marketing standpoint. And so it's funny the amount of back and forth that we had over this one color. That said, my editor, Emily Newsom, on the book was like, could not have been more supportive and more helpful and kind of caught between this sort of back and forth about a color cover for Pride, right? Like how funny is this that this no, now we're not arguing about characters being out or gay characters being couples. We're arguing about like how pink should their background color be. That to me is just kind of mind blowing, right? Like, yeah. It's sort of funny.
So
I think what was more interesting, if I can just finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
Was the corporate list of which characters to showcase. Because I was like, when I said yes to this, like months ago, I was like, okay, sure. And I was like, it's all figures, you know, there's no backgrounds. This will be easy work. And it's a fun event. I get to draw characters I've never drawn before. But I was throwing out these names. And when they returned the list, I was like, oh, this is not nearly as comprehensive as I would have expected. And part of it was, I'm assuming it's because their characters relate to their cinematic universe. in some way, like,
Mm-hmm.
or that they have plans or vision for. Valkyrie, for example, the new Valkyrie, I think is based on the Tessa Thompson version
Mm-hmm.
in the Thor movies. So that was more interesting to me than any other part of it, was who they chose to showcase on these covers.
That's going to be my question, is like, do you have a list? I mean, I know we saw obviously North Star and Valkyrie. I believe was Dakin one of them?
Yes.
A lot of characters. This also goes to show like that I'm not as connected to the world as I thought I was, where I was like, I had no idea. I think you did a Felicia Hardy, a Black Cat.
Black Cat, which I think was my first professional. I've drawn her in sketches and commissions a lot. I don't think I've ever actually drawn. I don't remember ever drawing her professionally, so that was kind of great. So it was
Moondragon.
Moondragon, yes.
That was crazy to me to see that you did Moondragon. I was like, man, I haven't seen that character in quite some time.
Well, which also makes me think, I wonder if she's going to be like in the new Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, I'm like, why is she here? She's not one of the more prominent LGBT characters. Like, what's the deal? And it made me think there must be some corporate reason for it.
I have a feeling that it's not the worst idea in the world to create an Infinity Watch. Seeing as how I know we have Adam Warlock coming, and Guardians 3 coming out in 2023.
I think. Oh, is it 3?
I think it's like in early 2023.
When is the Marvels coming out?
I don't know.
I think they just announced that it's a new Captain Marvel with Miss Marvel.
Yes. I may have missed it, but I know James Gunn recently said that they had a date, and it was like, it's a lot sooner than we thought. It's going to be early 2023. And I remember somebody's like, 2023 is early. And he's like, do you not know what we're doing? Like, do you not know how hard it is to make a movie? Right. Have you heard of movies? They take a while, man.
Do you remember when movies took 3 years and now we're like, get them out.
Well, it's like we have them. We have so many of them coming out that like they're still taking that long. Yeah. It's just we got distracted with Ant-Man and the Wasp and didn't realize that they've been working on Endgame for 2.5 years already because Ant-Man and the Wasp is showing up.
Right.
And you're like, oh yeah, there's that wonderful distraction. Are there any characters from the LGBTQ covers that we haven't said, or any that haven't been revealed? America Chavez was also one of them, I believe.
America Chavez was one. Iceman was there. Dakin was there. Let's see. Valkyrie, Mystique, Moondragon, Wicked Hulking. There were 9 total.
Copy that. That covers it.
North Star, which I joke about. I joked on Instagram. I drew him like he knew he was going to get photographed and had just gotten done with the Botox, which is my favorite. Very smooth. I told the colorist to color him very smooth.
I do like that, because that vanity, he does sort of have that. He walks with that vanity of being just a fantastic character. Like what a wonderful character to be.
He was also an Olympic skier. Like he was a celebrity. So
cheater.
Like, he's getting his touch ups.
He was cheating. Can't have powers like that and be an Olympic. That would make, it would be very interesting, I think, now, especially because, and boy, did I not want to make this aggressively political, but, we see a lot about trans women competing in sports and people claiming that there's the unfair advantage, and 2 arguments of very viable, understandings. And this is where, like, when I say, like, I am very progressive, and also it's like, I do see both sides on that one. Situations. I'm wondering if the allegory will be made at some point in time of superheroes engaging, or people with powers engaging competitively and having that sort of advantage because of how they were born being utilized. I wonder if that would, it seems like it would be like a one shot, like something you'd hear of in like an issue of Tangled Web or something like that.
But I had forgotten that actually was a character. That was a beat of North Star's early history, right? Was that he cheated. Like he used his powers, I think, to become a champ. Like it wasn't an accident.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, I got to be honest. I haven't read Alpha Flight in quite some time.
Oh, I have to go back and I mean, that Burn stuff is probably some of my favorite comic stuff of all time. But that's actually really interesting. Well, this goes into again, totally spinning, but I just started rewatching. My boyfriend is not into this stuff at all, decided out of the goodness of his heart he was going to watch all the Marvel movies from beginning to end, but he was watching them in chronological order for some reason. I have no idea why.
Like not release order, but chronological?
Not release order, but chronological order, because he liked that. And mind you, he watches half of them while he's on his phone. Like, he's not interested at all. But we got to Civil War, and I remember having very heated discussions with my friends about who was right and who was wrong in Civil War. And one of the things that I think is really interesting with the metaphor of superpowers is this no idea of registration or containment, right? Like, and I get a lot of pushback from LGBTQ people when I'm like, no, I'm kind of on the side where if you can blow up a mountain with your mind, you can't be trusted to be your own, like, judge and jury, right? Like, and people are like, what? So they should go to jail just because they were born? And I was like, that's not what I said. And it's also not a fair read of the metaphor, I think, right? Like,
there's definitely, that's a very Twitter reaction, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're just saying they should all just be in camps? It's like, no, man, but if you can shoot a photon beam that'll level a school, we might want to have to keep track on you. And that's part of the payoff here.
Right. And also, like, because it's sort of like if you get in a car, there are rules about driving a car, right? Like, you can't do certain things and some stuff should be against the law. And it was really interesting watching Civil War again, because I had the same reaction. I had the same reaction to it I did when I first saw it. And a lot of it was so interesting because it all sort of centered on the Scarlet Witch, like accidentally killing people while fighting the bad guy and whatever. And like, they like say that like 11 people died. Right. And then Cap is like, but we should be the ones that, like, no, but I think the objection was in the idea of the United Nations controlling them. I think that was the parsing of the language.
Or a governing body of some way to decide who you can save.
Right. But at the same time, it was like, I'm supposed to trust you after what the movie just showed us your group can do by accident. Like, it's a really fascinating argument to me about, and this is the sort of stuff where I'm not sure how much I love reality creeping into, like, that kind of political reality creeping into superhero stuff, because it's that sort of deconstruction I think makes superheroes not work, right? Like,
yeah.
It's sort of interesting intellectual or theorizing, but at some point it just stops being fun.
Yeah, there's an interesting part where, like, I think there was a chance for Steve Rogers to sort of shuffle off the Captain America moniker and go nomad in the situation where, like, if he's saying, like, no, I don't want to be overseen, but meanwhile you're wearing the flag and your name is America. Like, there's kind of like, you're kind of it would be like me running around in like a Coca-Cola sweatshirt, calling myself Captain Coca-Cola, shooting people in the spine because they're shoplifting and being like, you can't do anything about this, Coca-Cola. And it's like, well, they're going to want to.
Well, but I thought what was more interesting as presented in that movie, again, just watching it, and I love that movie so much. It's ridiculous.
I love it. I think it's fantastic. Yeah.
Is how much he comes out, like, when he's like, we should be the ones that we should be doing our own oversight. I'm like, but your best friend was hypnotized by Nazis and did some really terrible things. Do you not think that could happen to you, right? Or to your team? It was just interesting to me the way it was framed. And the reason I bring this up, I've had really interesting debates with friends, like heated discussions about superpowered registration, like, and like what that means. Like, should there be oversight on a group like the Avengers?
Yeah, and I'm of two minds. Like, I live in the gray for that one.
Yeah, I'm afraid that I live less in the gray than ever before, I think. And a lot of it has to do with drawing them, right? Like, I know part of it has so much to do with knowing what they're physically capable of.
That is true.
And part of it now is having movies that show us the death and destruction that happens when they show up for whatever reason.
Like, imagine, for example, if the Dark Phoenix film, which was objectively bad.
Which I've never seen it.
You're doing great. Imagine though if they brought the scale of the comics Dark Phoenix saga, which includes global genocide by a character, how much that will change the level of conflict and add that sort of level, which I think is interesting. We have diverted slightly, but I do want to circle back to another project because 2 years ago when we were talking and I said, when is Wonder Woman, the Historia coming out? And you were like, I'm working on it soon. And you are a liar. This is, it's fine. I actually don't mind, but this is one of the most long-awaited books in comics. And I don't want to say, because you're writing, Kelly Sue DeConnick is writing, right? And you are doing the art. This is one of the most long-awaited books, to the point where I hang out with Ed Brubaker at Comic-Con in 2019 or something. And he's like, when is that book coming out? Like he was like, tell him I need that book. A lot of people are waiting on that book. Do we have an ETA as to when we're going to see that book?
I think it's late October.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
When was it supposed to be released,
October,
by the way?
What?
When was it originally slated to come out?
It was never slated to be released. I took that job and I told them I turned that job down. And then Kelly Sue called and I was like, I will take this job, but it can have no deadline. You can't talk about it. You can't schedule it until we're done. 2 weeks later, it's in the Hollywood Reporter, right? And I'm like, great. Because when I took that job, she had not written a word of script. I had done a single piece of art, which was the Wonder Woman promo piece, right? So it's not like we were working on it when the book was announced. We hadn't even started, but they were hawking Black Label. So we didn't really start for a couple months after that. I think she wrote 5 pages and I was learning how to work on the iPad. So I used a few months to sort of figure out how to make art on an iPad because I wanted to do this project that way. So and then it's been the slow, incredibly slow process. But Wonder Woman's 80th anniversary is in October. My 30th anniversary in comics will be October. I mean, technically this summer, but my first printed work will be November. So I think they're angling it for that.
Oh, a little anniversary.
A little anniversary. Yes. And I've said before, it's easily the best thing I've ever drawn. I think. And I say it's so weird to say that because it sounds obnoxious, but I
will second it because I've seen a lot of the stuff that you've sent me. You've posted small previews on your social media.
Right.
You've also sent me very detailed photos, and I will say that this is mind-blowing stuff.
It's the only way I can justify this length other than, years of living in Donald Trump's America, which really threw me off, is, luckily I can have the excuse, but I want it out. DC wants it out. So I'm just wrapping up the last couple of pages. And a lot of what took so long were design choices. Like the book has been, I say has been laid out for a year and a half, but there were like these holes about what things look like. And I wanted the work to have cohesion. And I think almost every page has multiple panels of Easter eggs for comic book fans, for mythology fans. And I'm actually just thrilled. There was also, in a sense, a little bit like hyperbole. I don't mean it to be or to sound like that. But the thing that was amazing about working with Kelly Sue is Kelly Sue's now ranks. When she finally turned in that script, because it came in a couple sections, I was awed by it. I learned so much from the way she scripted, which I haven't done. I often say that Grant Morrison and Warren Ellis are my 2 favorite scriptwriters because I felt like I learned the most about writing and also because they knew how to write for me. And I am, as everyone knows, highly idiosyncratic and I'm not easy to write for. And I like a very specific thing and very hard to place and I'm slow and blah, blah, blah.
You're methodical.
I am methodical, actually. I think about it a lot. Which is not good in a medium where you need to turn out stuff monthly. But the script, I was just like, I understood every character. at every moment. I got it in ways like where she didn't need to describe things. And we did have conversations about certain characters. I'm like, I know who that is. I know who that is. I know what this emotional beat is. I know what this action is. And it just stuns me how much I got from that script in a way that I had not gotten in years from working with others. And so part of it was I just kind of wanted to honor that work. Also, Kelly Sue had such a specific point of view on it. I wanted to make sure I nailed it. The other thing was I'm dealing with, I think it's 30 Amazons and like 14 gods and then a host of like human characters. There was a large cast of characters, and like the gods never, I think Hera has like 6 or 7 costumes, and a lot of the gods don't appear the same way twice. And so there was a lot of methodology that went into the way each one thought, and I wanted to make sure I represented. And with these Amazons, one thing I'm really proud of is the width and breadth of female representation. Kelly Sue and I talked about that for a year before we even designed these characters, what they would look like, how they would represent their gods and goddesses, how they would represent women in the modern day and the ancient world, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So it feels to me like the work will be worth the wait. I hope it is.
I'm really looking forward to it. This is, in my opinion, one of the most long-awaited books and you're going to hate that I say this, but in the history of the medium, a lot of people have been chomping at the bit for this, and we're really excited to see it come in. And I'm really, really stoked about it. Everything I've seen, there's the one, you did one of, it's like a close-up perspective shot of, I forget who it was, so I don't want to mislabel it, but someone on a horse. And and that piece alone, I was like, I have to get this.
I think if nothing else, once people have it in their hand, the thing.
How many pages is it, by the way?
It's not that long.
How long?
You'll see.
It's 64. Yeah. Oh, that's a good 3 prestige format books.
Proud of. Or I mean, there's a lot of walk away, but comfortable with, is that anyone who puts their $8 down on this will be able to reread it for years and get something new out of it.
Oh, I like that.
I do not think it will be disposable, right? I think people will read it over and over, and every panel, of course, because it's chock full. It's me, so it's not an easy breeze. You know, I think the first 42 pages are all double page spreads, right? So. Oof. With inset panels and things like that. And then there's just a lot of visual information, but I don't think, it doesn't feel to me yet like it's overstuffed, but it will make people look and look back again and look back again and look back again.
It's like an IMAX comic.
Yes. And for those who choose to invest in it, they will find new things, I believe, upon every return.
Well, I am you're not just my cool friend, but I am a fan of your work. I love the stuff that you do. I love when I can be a fan of my friends. So I'm very excited to see this come out. The last question I was going to have, and I know we're going a little bit long, but I don't mind. I was going to ask you, because you did these great covers, you're working on this great interior book. Do you, like, if you had a preference where you could only do either covers or interiors, what would you pick?
That's a really hard question, because here's the thing. I probably made minimum wage on those interiors, just because the amount of time I've taken with them and the amount of care that I've taken with them. It's been a completely impractical work choice, because I could have done numerous covers in just a couple of months and made more money than I probably made in the past year on that book. It should be said also, I wasn't only working on that book. I was working on a couple of other projects at the same time. Just if people are like, what were you doing all that time? That's a really strange question, because part of it just comes down to economics. Like, when I'm working on those interiors, I get in this zone and I think about, like, I'm creating this amazing magical world, and when I see these things appear and I see this narrative happen, I'm like, I'm doing this thing that very few people can actually do or have done successfully. I'm creating movie and TV and all this kind of stuff right here. And I think that's really amazing. It's just hard. It's a lot of labor. And one thing I talk a lot about, and I say this with the work of comedians and entertainers, what we do is labor. We're practitioners. And I think a lot about how people think that what we just do is kind of magic.
Well, they only see the finished product.
Like, you just make jokes. You're not really thinking, like, especially, right? I'm just thinking, like, I think a lot of people don't see what we do as actually work or as the result of years of experience doing something, right? It's just this magic thing that appears. And so when I say the Historia is a labor of love, it truly is. But there was a lot of labor that went into that book, a lot of physical time that went into that book. And it's just, we don't get paid well enough. And I hate that answer, because I used to be one of those people that used to hate when my peers would talk about the finances of our business in interviews. But I think that's part of it.
Well, we do need to eat. It's pretty huge.
It's absolutely true. I used to think it was really vulgar and kind of like unseemly, like, because I because for the most part as a fan, I don't want to know about the finances of creation. I just want to know, like, what were you thinking about? What's your influence? Da, da, da.
I would say that the internet has worked its way to find niche appreciation, but in general devalue art. That and especially I've noticed the younger generation, like the Zennial generation, they have this, it's a very sort of communist version of art, the memification of art, which is like, I see a thing, I'm just going to share it. It's now the thing I shared. And it's like, yeah, but that's somebody's hard work. That's somebody's intellectual thought. And you're not giving them credit. And they're like, well, so what? Like, they don't understand that aspect of it. And it is sort of frustrating. Like, from my perspective, like, for example, I've had like tweets stolen, my name cropped off and shared by like WorldStar. And I'm like, hey man, you've got like several million followers. It would cost you nothing to not cut my head off. And I said something to them, and like, I got so many replies that are like, oh, grow up, bro. It's not a big deal. And I'm like, yeah, but I just got robbed. Like, somebody stole my thought. And that's my thought. I came up with it, and it would cost them nothing to give me at least that attention, let alone the fact that I am giving them one of their posts that they will make money off of.
Right.
And so in that regard, it is very frustrating.
I just, many years ago, there's this thing coming out in June, again, for, if there are any academic nerds, it's about, so comic scholarship around universities has really risen the past couple of years. This guy named Ramsey Fawaz, who wrote an amazing book about this called The New Mutants, which I recommend to everyone, because it's like the most readable, most loving sort of exploration of comics, primarily through the X-Men, The New Mutants.
What's it called? What's it called again?
The New Mutants.
Oh, just,
it's literally called, but it's a book. It's not the comic.
So
it's a book.
It's like a novel looking book, but it's not fiction. I mean, but like a classic book.
Yep.
But it's called The New Mutants, the same way the Marvel, the famously good Marvel film.
Unbelievably. Wow, I never saw that either. I tend not to watch things I think are going to make me sad about the source material.
It's very 20th Century Fox X-Men, where you're like, eh.
But that cast was mostly good, I think, right? Looking.
No, the cast is talented. Yeah. But you can have a bunch of great cooks, but if their ingredients are
I've made a lot of in my life. But anyway, Ramsey asked me to write the piece on Wonder Woman. And I was thrilled. So here, this book, which is now going to be passed out to colleges and universities, it's all these keywords. So it's these pertinent words and phrases that had not been defined in our business. And I got to write the Wonder Woman one. And so the idea is that comic scholars will now all have, and it's everything from like, what is a panel border to who is this character, blah, blah, blah. So that's actually really, really cool. And there was a point there was a reason I threw that garbage in there. I don't remember what it was, but
I think it's to plug a project that you worked lovingly on. Perhaps
that could be, and actually one that I know other people worked lovingly on as well. Oh, I know what it was. Ramsey was saying And he's the one that really hit home because he believes that what we do, because he loves comics so much. I mean, obsessed. We will sit in a bar and do nothing but just talk about X-Men, right? Like we're 12 years old. It's amazing. But he's absolutely hardcore about calling us laborers and practitioners. And I've actually picked up that language. I use his language to describe what we do because artist it's a lovely term, clearly, but it makes us more disposable, right? Like it sounds flightier. It sounds like, oh, he's an artist. And that has a connotation. But if you say, oh, he's a laborer, like that's a totally different thing. And people see it as work as opposed to art, which is just this thing that you make up. And
yeah, it's something that's ethereal, something that exists in the ether, and it's just to be consumed at whatever. No, I feel that way. And it's very similar. I think for me too, like interview is definitely one of those things that people might not view as a type of labor because they don't see the effort that goes into researching, preparing, and timing and experience and stuff like that. So I do recognize and appreciate that. We are coming up. I asked for an hour from you and we're coming up on an hour and a half. I do not want to take any more of your time. You're on the Cape in May. You're vaxxed up. You're ready to get some sun. You are vaxxed, right?
I've been vaxxed. Okay. I got vaxxed as soon as I could.
Same. Yeah, I got vaxxed in February, and I've been waiting for people to get caught up.
Shut the f*** up.
I got lucky. Basically, I was at a testing site, and it was a testing site, and it was also an inoculation site, a vaccine site, and there was through some sort of clerical error, they had to burn through a bunch of vaccines real quick, because they're. Once you open the thing or whatever. Yeah. I don't know the techniques of it. All I know is that they were like, hey, if you want a vaccine, get your down that hill real quick and you can get one and you won't have to worry about getting the second one. I mean, you won't have to worry about the scheduling for it. You just come back. So I got very lucky.
I'm thrilled out of my mind to hear that. My, just two quick things. My boyfriend got vaxxed at Jacob Javits, and I swear to God, it was an amazing experience.
Like the Javits Center?
At the Javits
Like
Center.
New York Comic Con, the Javits Center.
New York Comic Con Javits, which I haven't been since like Comic Con of like a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. And so we are there, and it's like a scene out of 28 weeks later, where they're letting everyone back into London, right? So it's like just these lines of people with masks and plastic partitions and military, I think, and doctors but everyone, we were there at 3:30 in the morning with hundreds of other New Yorkers. And the thing that blew me away was what a friendly, pleasant experience it was. So everyone was so good and so nice at 3:30 in the morning.
You know why? Because they were getting their lives saved. And there is no better feeling. There's no better euphoria than receiving something that is saving your life. I was not prepared for the emotional feelings that I was going to get after I got that shot. I mean, I almost wept in my car. It was like finding out you had like a birthday party, a surprise party where you're just like overwhelmed with this idea that you're like, holy shit, I don't have to be afraid of dying anymore, which is crazy for me at 39 years old to think about, oh, my mortality isn't something that I have to focus on like I did for the past year. Think about the emotional turmoil that has been placed upon collectively on humanity of, minus that third, but of like, oh, I could die. I could literally die. And this thing was so random. It was like healthy people were like, and then they were ravaged. And then people that weren't healthy were fine. It was crazy. Oh, yeah. It was crazy. It was so arbitrary.
So arbitrary. I was actually talking about, because when I got vaccinated, it was at Bellevue. Also, another amazing experience. The staff, considering like what the infrastructure, I've been awed, completely rethinking my life clearly by the people who figured this out, right? Who figured out how to turn Jacob Javits into a giant vaccination center for thousands and thousands of New Yorkers, and made it work, and made it so pleasant, and made it so nice at 3:30 in the morning. Or Bellevue, like who are the people whose jobs it was to figure out how to get these vaccinations into our arms. And in my case, it was such a pleasant, lovely experience. And the people I spoke to were so great. And our nurses were great. I'm like, this is all they're doing for weeks, is just churning people through and getting these vaccines into arms. I'm in awe of the people that were able to, I keep calling it infrastructure, but to conceive of and execute these plans to get millions and millions and millions of human beings vaccinated. Like, I am in awe of them. I'm very, very grateful.
Yeah, it is. There is definitely this sort of like this real understanding of that natural heroism that a lot of people, people that were working at the vaccine sites, that were all parts of this relatively well-functioning machine to save lives. And also the aspect of the people that didn't believe in it is also very infuriating. But that being said, Phil, we've got, so you got the book, The New Mutants, that should be coming out in June, you said?
So that's Ramsey's book. My book, Historia, should be out in October.
I was going to say that. Don't worry.
Oh,
I paid attention.
Because I am old and I'm losing my mind. And so I have to go through it. I literally have to make a list. I'm counting on my fingers.
I made a list. I made a list for you.
Okay.
So don't worry. There's a list here of stuff that I have been taking notes on that I can discuss. So the New Mutants book that you are a part of, which I was saying, comes out soon.
No, that's the Keyword book. New Mutants was written by my editor on the Keywords book.
Okay. I was a little bit confused. It's fine.
Totally got it.
Then we also have the LGBTQ covers from Marvel, and those should be releasing, I'm assuming, relatively soon, I would hope, because
and all through June.
Yeah, so throughout June, during Pride Month, they will be released. So definitely, if you are interested in getting those, make sure you contact your local comic shop and make sure that those variants are pulled, because they are variants, correct?
Yes.
So they are gorgeous. Definitely, if you are interested in those books, which you should be, let your LCS know, let your comic shop know that you want these, and they will do their best to pull them for you, I'm sure. And then, of course, Wonder Woman, the Historia being released in October. Another thing that you better make sure that you reserve. I have a feeling that this thing is going to sell out of your comic shop. So make sure you pull it. Oh, it's a 0% chance it won't. It's going to be Batman Damned without the yes, for those of you wondering what that reference is, a wonderful book by Brian Azzarello and Lee Bermejo called Batman Damned, the first Black Label book that was going out, and there was a whole ass hog of Batman. So aside from those three projects, are there any other things that you want people that are listening now to be on the lookout for?
No, not for me. That I think should be it for the year. Everything else I'm working on is sort of behind the scenes or TV related, and will be announced at some point in the future.
Perfect. I love that. If you are interested in following Phil on Twitter, he is at Phil Jimenez NYC. And then on Instagram, I believe it's the same. Is that correct? You'll have put that NYC in there. So at Phil Jimenez.
That's how you find me.
JIMENEZ. If you are wondering, NYC is great to follow that. Now, for those of you that are listening for free, thank you so much. You can check me out at patreon.com/Jeff May, and you can get the episode you just listened to unedited, uncensored, and a week earlier than you listened to it. I always release it on Patreon a week early, and we don't bleep out the swears. We let it ride. This is like the HBO of long form interview. You can check me out at Hey There Jeffro on all social media that matter. So Twitter and Instagram only for me. Don't find me on Facebook. I don't use it, and my mom talks to me on there, and I don't want you talking to my mom. Leave my mom alone. My mom's great. I love her. She's a florist. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. What a miserable Mother's Day my mom had because she's a florist and there's nothing I can do about it. I don't know. Is there other stuff? You can check out Gamefully Unemployed's Patreon, where you can hear Tom and Jeff watch Batman. And of course, you can hear all my wonderful stuff on the Unpopular Opinion Network, such as You Don't Even Like Sports, the Unpop's main podcast, and we just rebooted Listcast. And you can check that at patreon.com/unpops as well. You are all fantastic. Phil, thank you so much for spending time to talk to me. You are a damn delight.
Even though we talked about Legion?
Yes, of course. This is the second podcast in as many weeks as I've talked about Legion, and I'm here for it.
Yes. You have always been nothing but great to me. You have done nothing but kind to me since I met you.
Why wouldn't
You're
I
great.
be? I would always be. I mean,
I'm just saying it's a lovely thing. I'm grateful for it, and I'm sending gratitude through the airwaves.
I appreciate that.
You're a lovely person.
Well, it is returned in kind. I have no reason to be rude to you. Not like some of the people I've met, if you know what I mean.
Well, I mean, that's probably given you a reason. I'm always eager and happy to talk to you. And for those of you listening, Jeff is a really great person. So your support matters.
Don't believe his lies, people. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And you are, of course, a wonderful person. And there's a reason that I treat you in kind, because you're great.
Well, stop. Take the compliment.
I will. Thank you. I am great. I am great. Thank you all so much for listening. Appreciate each and every one of you. Blah, blah, blah. You know the drill. Bye. Hey everyone, our artwork is created by Justin T. Brown, who can be found at Artness by Justin Brown on Instagram, as well as artnessbyjustinbrown.com. That dope music you heard is by Troy Nababon, available at Troy Nababon on Instagram, as well as at troynababon.com. Nababon is spelled Nababon.